Oi oi, it's your boy, the Cheeto Vera of the UFC's mid-card era, and we're covering this week what was an extremely mid-card, while almost nothing else was going on. Very sad. Luckily, there was enough Japanese kickboxing going on that I could watch some of that, cheer myself up. We'll talk about the Rise El Dorado event on the Boycast this week, but in the meantime, there was a Crush event. The main event was pretty good. A guy with blue hair looked pretty fun. And maybe we'll touch on that later if we have time. We'll probably have time. I'm probably going like 15 minutes today on the quality of this UFC card. But the card was Cheeto Vera versus Corey Sandhagen in San Antonio, Texas. That's going to come up again because the Texas Commission is legendarily bad. If you don't know about the Texas Commission, they're the ones that let guys have canned oxygen in the corner in Strikeforce. They're the ones who let Scott Coker book Kimbo versus Dada and Ken Shamrock versus Hoist Gracie on the same night. They're the ones who suspended Kimbo for taking full-on steroids and getting caught and reduced the sentence to 90 days because Scott Coker was like, please. I believe before the second... what was it, Lawler Hendricks? It was one of Johnny Hendricks' fights for the title. They announced that they just weren't going to drug test. They weren't going to do the state level of drug testing for the fight. But between some questionable decisions and scorecards, and the night before, Fury, I think it was Fury FC, had a card in somewhere in Texas because Frank Collazo went from doing the world's worst reffing performance to judging cards on this UFC event within a day of the incident. The incident was a guy had his opponent in a triangle choke and choked him into unconsciousness. And the ref didn't do anything. Frank Collazo didn't do anything. Just watched him in the choke. So the opponent switched to an arm bar and was waking this guy up by breaking his arm. And the ref was watching the arm break and not doing it. So he let him go fully unconscious in a choke for ages. Then he let him get his arm broken while he was basically unconscious. And then he didn't, he was like waiting for a tap. And both all the commentators, everyone ringside is shouting, it's done. Stop the fight. It was genuinely the scariest piece of reffing I've seen in MMA. So that guy should be banned forever, Frank Collazo, the referee. But as it turns out, they bumped him up and gave him a judging gig on the UFC card. There should be an equivalent of seppuku for refs when they make these kind of decisions. Or don't make decisions. I think that was the main problem. But anyway, your main event was Corey Sandhagen versus Cheeto Vera. This is controversial because somehow it was a split decision when Corey Sandhagen won every round. There was not a round where Marlon Vera did more than him or had more effect than him in this entire fight. And yet one of the judges somehow scored it with Cheeto Vera winning. If you missed out on the Patreon Boycast and the preview of this fight, you didn't really miss out because I talked about it for about 5 minutes and basically said, this is the same as any time Marlon Vera meets someone who can put together volume. He should lose. He might not. The style that he uses is not very clever. It's sitting back and letting the other guy pile up points and then hoping for big moments is not a reliable way to win. It's impressive that he managed to do it in his last two. But he's a desperately low volume and low urgency fighter against the highest volume fighter in the division, probably. I think it was the Heavy Hands boys just talking about winning rounds, but Corey Sandhagen is very good at winning rounds. Like he'll outstrike you at a really high pace for 2 minutes. He'll try a takedown. If he gets you down, he'll hold you down as long as possible. And if he fails, he'll go back to striking. And if you get up, he'll go back to striking. He's one of those amazing examples of how taking the initiative and going first and not allowing the opponent to come back, or not allowing the opponent to set the pace of the fight or just stay out at a distance and limit the number of exchanges, is a very powerful weapon in MMA. And Marlon Vera, like I said it already on Twitter, but Jason Perillo coming in and going, we're 2 rounds down, but don't make it 3. We're 3 rounds down, but don't make it 4. That is the new Dean Thomas in Tyron Woodley's corner going, I'm going to need to see those combinations, Tyron. Do you know your fighter? I mean, you know him from months and months training together, but do you know your fighter if you think in fights he's going to be able to change when he's shown a 30-fight form of not being able to? And that's the really crazy thing about Cheeto Vera is that he's touted for his endurance and durability. They're talking about how he fasts on the weekends and he runs miles and miles and he's in tremendous shape and whatnot. But he fights like someone who is desperately scared of gassing out. just doing as little as possible to make sure that in the 4th and 5th round he has the energy to do something. And then that's too little too late. You know, he put on a burst at the end of the 5th round, which was just enough to stop his stock from completely cratering with the fan base. But yeah, aside from the reluctance to throw and all that, the ring positioning was a big issue. For 3 rounds, he stood there with his back on the fence, and that allowed Corey Sandhagen to just do whatever he wanted. You saw him step in and dig body shots. You saw him, he was very good at timing when Cheeto was actually going to try and circle off. Kept hitting him with right hands over the shoulder, just loopy right hands as Cheeto was trying to circle. And then anytime, the thing is, if you put your back to the fence, you have removed 180 degrees of your movement. You can't back away when the opponent steps into strike. So you know they know you're even going to duck in, come forward, clinch up, whatever, but you've really limited your options. So every time that Corey Sandhagen stepped in, he knew that Cheeto couldn't retreat, which meant that he could step in with body shots. It meant that he could jump in with flying knees, as he's always done. And then he could enter on takedown attempts. You're not going to be able to sprawl back when you're on the fence, so you dig yourself into the fence. You try and use your defensive fence wrestling to stop being taken down. And that was when Sandhagen would let go and hit him with uppercuts and things like that. So, yeah, one-sided ass kicking, largely because Cheeto Vera wouldn't do anything, but also because he was standing next to the fence and didn't have any sense of why that was hurting him. In the 4th and 5th rounds, he starts striking back a bit, and that brings the fight back to the center of the cage, which makes Sandhagen less effective. Not effective. He was still winning about every minute of the fight up to the last 30 seconds. But not standing against the fence meant that Sandhagen had a harder time, just teeing off with whatever he wanted when he wanted. It was another case of one fighter outlanding the other 2-1, so the scorecard is even more incredible. The takedowns were good from Corey. Corey's been working on this stuff. Probably, he's always been working on it, but you've been noticing him go for his own takedowns a lot more, certainly since the Aljamain Sterling loss and that sort of derailing his title run. But it makes a massive difference for him. I can't remember if John Lineker was before that, but the John Lineker fight, he used takedowns really effectively. As the much taller man, he shot on John Lineker successfully. He did them to Song Yudong, really mixed things up. I think he landed 2 of 12, but they were at key times, and by doing them, he could make Song Yudong really overcommit to sprawling and hit him with follow-up strikes. And then in this one, he used them really effectively just because Cheeto Vera, the lack of urgency is really obvious on the feet, but it's also pretty obvious on the ground. It's not so much a lack of urgency, it's a lack of priorities. He doesn't wall walk, he doesn't try and stand up, he doesn't desperately instigate scrambles. He wants to lay on his back, throwing up triangles and up kicking. And the best bit of offense he got from his back was an illegal up kick, and then using his fingers in Corey Sandhagen's eyes to stiff arm him away and elbow him. Sandhagen's a good top player, no doubt, but there was nothing keeping Vera in half guard at a lot of points. He was just there on the bottom, holding. Whenever you watch the people who are really good at not getting held down, weird example because he's not won in forever, but Kelvin Gastelum, very hard to hold down because he lets guys pass his guard and he just turtles and stands up. It's kind of like the Brian Ortega thing. If you show a great guard in some fights, people go, "Oh, damn, he's going to be a force. People won't even want to take him down." And then when people do take him down and don't get submitted just by keeping their elbows in and keeping disciplined and hitting him with short elbows and punches, suddenly that refusal to wall walk becomes a "can you even wall walk, bro?" So ultimately, good performance from Corey Sandhagen, very disappointing performance from Cheeto Vera. He's calling out Petr Yan now, which is a really interesting decision to go from one super high activity fighter to another. Particularly as Petr Yan's coming off a loss to a super active guy. He's got to love the idea of fighting a guy who does nothing for 3-4 minutes at a time. And I do want to say that this is all coming from me as a Cheeto Vera fan. His lack of urgency has become really more pronounced in recent years. As he becomes more successful, he seems to become more passive and happy to wait. When he was on that little run against lesser opponents, a sort of Charles Oliveira tune-up run, and then he fought Song Yudong, and I thought, man, he really should be able to beat Song Yudong, but that was, again, another really frustrating fight where he did everything. He showed that he could beat Song Yudong, but he didn't do enough of that to beat Song Yudong. He did on some people's scorecards, but ultimately lost. But it was another one where it's like, if you'd done a bit more than the bare minimum, you would have won. So Sandhagen wants Merab, sort of leaving O'Malley in the lurch. I mean, everyone thinks that O'Malley versus Sandhagen would be a fun fight. You've got a sort of minimalist switch hitter versus a maximalist switch hitter. But Merab Dvalishvili is much tougher call out based on his last fight. Everyone still has that fresh in their minds. It'll be a lot of fun. One thing Sandhagen has is great pace and the ability to keep it up. So if Merab Dvalishvili doesn't want to fight for a title, which apparently he doesn't, they might as well just do that. He can stick around knocking off contenders and ruining the division. Or at least the title picture. To save from being too negative on this card, because there was a lot of bad stuff, let's talk about some of the things that surprised me with how good they were. Oh, actually, no, not a surprise. Nate Landwehr, did I give him the technical turnaround for this year, or for last year's Slackies? He was certainly in the running, based on that Onama fight and the Ludovic Klein fight. In this one, he had a hard time getting going. Austin Lingo came out and started pumping double jabs, and Landwehr was completely bamboozled by them. Keeps his hands really close to his jaw, but also every time he does anything, his head comes way up in the air. But then as the fight went on, he got a read on Lingo and he started landing some good counter shots. I'm just watching him out there and I'm thinking there's probably no one better suited for Quinton Jackson's old style of sort of crazy monkey boxing. I don't think, Quinton Jackson didn't learn it as Crazy Monkey. Crazy Monkey is Rodney King, not the guy from the LA Police video, but a South African boxing coach. He sort of popularized this style with elbows really high. So you are basically exposing yourself to the body shot every time, but you're doing a belt and braces cover that works, belt and braces cover of your head that works with 4-ounce gloves. So go watch some Prime Rampage for some of that. Rampage versus Chuck 1. I mean, Rampage versus Chuck 2, just watch the knockout. He catches a left hook, I think. Oh, it's a left hook to the body, and he's doing his Crazy Monkey. But he comes straight back with the right hook of his own or left hook of his own or whatever it is. But watch the fight, the third fight with Vanderlei. He covers up, takes the Vanderlei windmill on his alternate high elbows, and then he swings back and gets inside Vandy's punches and knocks him out. I think it'd be a great move for Landwehr to sort of focus on that stuff. He was doing it here. He was doing it against the cage a lot, but then he'd get back to reaching for punches or having his hands low. I think if he just went full on, hands high, elbows up for every shot and coming back with counters, he'd do really well. But you also saw a lot of that, the move that he debuted against Onama, which I was raving about, because the other guy who's famous for it in the UFC is Muslim Salikov, who is a very slow-paced, quite boring fighter. People got mad at me for saying that last time, being like, have you ever seen any of his fights? It's like, yeah, I've seen all of them. I'm a big fan of Muslim Salikov. Most of the time he's boring. Just because he just got a knockout doesn't mean he's not boring. He's a very low-paced, low output striker, but he does a lot of this, which is step forward on your lead foot, lower your level, pump your shoulder at the opponent, and then back up. It's just a shoulder fake and a retreat. And it works so well to draw people out. If they're looking for big counters, if they're looking to counter kick, they will throw themselves out of position and you can come in off the back foot throwing. So he did that loads to Onama, who was just desperate to get Landwehr off him. He was doing it here against Lingo, but Lingo's jab was really upsetting him. One thing that I do like about Landwehr, he's got this weird sort of style, but he does he throws his right hand inside of his opponent's jab, which is sometimes called an inside right, but sometimes it's an uppercut, sometimes it's like a weird right hook where he steps off to the left, sometimes it's a right straight, but throwing inside the jab is very rare. You don't see it a lot. Edwin Hazlett used to talk about the inside right, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to risk doing that. But if you do it, it's pretty sharp. Korean Superboy, what's his name? Doo-Ho Choi. He hit a couple back in the day. But yeah, respect to Landwehr, got through having trouble with the jab. He's interesting because he uses kicks well, or he was using kicks well in this fight, including lots of high kicks, but he also looks like he doesn't really stretch. His flexibility is really not great. He's leaning all the way over backwards when he's throwing up these left high kicks. But they were doing their job. They were keeping Lingo's hands at home. If you can't jab comfortably, if you can't throw comfortably without worrying about a shin bone hitting you upside the head, that's always trouble. He was landing good low kicks to counter the jab, which is another great technique which we have in MMA, which we don't have in boxing. As the guy jabs, you can slip it, you can take it on the face, you can block it, but as long as you low kick afterwards, you can catch him in a really bad extended position. And then the second round, Landwehr was able to overwhelm him and choke him in emphatic fashion. There was a really nice attempt at a takedown in this one, where he shot a head outside single, did a little run the pipe / dump to get Lingo hopping backwards on his standing leg, and tried to come up behind him, and he almost got it. It was really impressive. Them flyweight moves, shooting and trying to get on the back. And then afterwards, he was funny, as always. So I'm a huge Late Landwehr fan. I've turned a corner on him because he was just wooden and awkward looking. And he's actually made some real efforts. He's always going to be sort of janky, but I think there's stuff there that can really be brought to lever. It was very weird listening to his corner because they were instructing him in all the things that I wouldn't have wanted him to do. They're going like, yeah, jab back, jab, jab with him or whatever. And I'm going, oh, no, he's eating the jab every time. I'd rather he just, try and cover up and swing over the jab or swing back or low kick or whatever. But yeah, that was fun. And then Macy Barber versus Andrea Lee, I was really surprised this was quite fun. Mainly for Andrea Lee's clinch stuff is always quite interesting. She really does hunt the body in the clinch, and she has some nice trips too, which, there's not enough of in men's MMA, let alone women's MMA. And Macy Barber, I like for the fact that she actually swings with her hips. If you watch her trying to elbow people or swing along the fence, she actually throws with some heat. A lot of women's fighters don't know why. There's just like a disconnect between the kinetic chains of their punching. It just looks like they're not building power from the floor to the hips to the shoulders into the swing. It just looks like they're pumping their hands. And Barber actually does look like she throws with some heat. One of the things I liked in this one, there was some argument over the first round because Macy Barber was on the bottom, but Andrea Lee was in full lay and pray mode. And the reason that happened was because Macy Barber got taken down into side control. She immediately put both hands into Andrea Lee's bicep and pushed it away. We're always talking about keep the crossface off. That top hand on side control or half guard, that hand that is going to be hugging your head, you've got to keep it away from you. And when you do that, the other person's sort of stuck. They have to pick something to do. And Lee was trying to smush her chest and shoulders in to Barber while her hand was being pushed out away from her. Her elbow was being pushed out away from her. So she wasn't really doing anything. She couldn't strike. She couldn't mount. She couldn't look to transition very well because Barber was pushing her arm away. And she just tried to burrow her head down. And what Barber did was something that Jessica Penne used to do back in the day, very flexible ass. And Liam McGeary, if you don't know him, go look him up. He was Bellator light heavyweight champ for a little while. British dude, 6'5", very gangly, rubbish striking, rubbish takedowns. He was Paul Craig, but I was about to say Paul Craig, but British. No, he was Paul Craig, but English, and not having success at the same level against the same opposition. But he used to do this all the time. He'd get past, and then he'd get his hands inside the crook of the opponent's bicep, push it up overhead, so up behind them as they're trying to bury their chest on him. And he'd throw his legs over his head like he was doing the Marilyn Manson or the Elton John, depending on where you grew up and heard that story. The old self-suck. It's a hard move to do. Not the self-suck, the fucking, this move I'm talking about, the crucifix from bottom side control. It's hard to do, but if you can do it, catches people by surprise. So Barber throws her legs over, gets them inside of Andrea Lee's top arm, and Andrea Lee is trying to stay on top with her arm being pulled back. So Barber just starts elbowing her. But if you watch Liam McGeary do this, he will transition to triangles and upside down triangles. He did it to Tito Ortiz. Yeah, bottom side crucifix, big fan. The old self-sucky escape. But then as the second round and third round, Andrea Lee was back in it more. Like I said, some really nice bodywork from the clinch. And bodywork out in the open, actually. She was swinging some hooks to the body, which I really liked. But Barber was throwing up the head kick on the open side a lot. It was a fun, serviceable fight. Macy Barber scraped the decision and then did a post-fight press conference where she said that she'd wreck the next girl just the same, having forgotten how close this fight was. But, it wasn't bad. Of the fights to watch from this card, I'd actually say that was one of the funner ones. There was the absolute chaos in the two flyweight openers. Flyweight, I used to laugh at people saying flyweight was the most technical weight class because the idea was that the lighter you go, the more technical it is. But no, the truth is, at a certain point, there's going to be less of a talent pool when you get down into really small people. I'm watching these fights and people are going, I wish we had DJ back to style on these guys. And these guys would probably beat John Moraga in his prime. John Moraga wasn't very good. But Victor Altamirano versus Vinicius Salvador was hilarious because Altamirano wheel kicked him in the hand into the head and turned him around. And Salvador was pretending to be Anderson Silva, going back to the cage and be like, you didn't hit me. Salvador has had the worst hair I've ever seen. Just a smiley face, a potato smile on the front of his head. If you've never had a potato smiley, you've never had British cuisine. Yeah, lots of fancy spin kicks in this one. Lots of just spin to win, but failing. This was kind of like Yaya Rodriguez versus Alex Caceres, where you're going, what's the point in spinning? Why don't you just walk up and punch him? There were some really nice overhook throws off the fence by Salvador against Altamirano. Altamirano was holding him against the fence, and Salvador had the overhook and stepped across and threw him with the whizzer, which we always like. It's the way to get off the fence nowadays. Unfortunately, Salvador kept ending up back against the fence and then having to do the same thing again, not actually benefiting from doing it a lot of the time. But I mean, he did throw into top position once, so that was cool. But it was mainly funny because Salvador spent so much time showboating and then lost a close decision. But the other one was CJ Vergara versus Daniel Da Silva. And I said on the Boycast, CJ Vergara, not great technically, but hard-nosed. And you don't see an awful lot of guys have success by being hard-nosed in these really low weight classes. But Daniel Da Silva, Lacerda, as they called him, was on an 0-3, all three stoppages, all three within all three within 2 rounds, all three within 6 minutes. That was his streak coming into this. Never won a fight in the UFC, but always goes out there and gets finished, which makes him valuable in the flyweight division where there aren't as many finishes. So he goes after Vergara and he goes hard as hell, knocks him down with a wheel kick, is chasing him, punching him all over the cage. Vergara is sprinting around the cage like people accused John Jones and Carlos Condit of doing, but actually in laps around the cage. And then Lacerda just hits a wall and goes to shit. Just round 2, he's hopeless. CJ Vergara gets on top of him. I believe Lacerda was holding a leg the entire time trying to attack it and just getting pounded out. Very funny. I was trying to decide who did the most bum-like version of their job in this fight. It was either Lacerda for fighting like a bum, CJ Vergara for getting beaten up by a bum, or Jason Herzog for letting CJ Vergara basically take 2 stoppages worth of damage before allowing him to come back and win. A rare miss for Jason Herzog, the official referee of the Jack Slack podcast. Then in terms of sloppy-ass brawls, you also had Trevin Giles versus Preston Parsons. Hilarious. Trevin Giles was doing that jab where you lean forward at the waist, you flick it out like you're Muhammad Ali, and then you don't do anything afterwards. So he's throwing these jabs, and then you're getting dinged on the way back. Parsons isn't avoiding anything. He's just taking punches on the head, getting his head snapped back like a Pez dispenser and throwing over the top. And he's still hurting Giles. Giles' takedown defense was largely okay, but then he got taken down in the first round and went straight to a buggy choke, which is hilarious as a giant welterweight. But no one in the booth knew what a buggy choke was. And I feel like it's pretty common knowledge in MMA because everyone's always complaining about it when people do throw it up rarely. There's been a few attempts in the UFC. We talked about it before mainly because it's such a stalemate move. You know, there are people who can do it for real, like Cade Ruotolo, Ty Ruotolo. J-Rod from the B team, he won the ADCC trials with a buggy choke. But dudes keep trying it in MMA, and you keep getting clips from Russian MMA organizations of guys just breaking their own knee, pulling on their leg, or getting slammed 3 or 4 times until they're unconscious. But the great thing about the buggy choke is that it stops the opponent from doing anything. He has to start like trying to deadlift out. If he wants to pick you up and slam you, that's when you let go and you move. You know, that's when you let go, and all that space between you opens up as you fall, as your back goes onto the mat and the opponent's still posturing up. You know, the buggy choke is a legit method of making stuff happen or stopping stuff from happening that would negatively affect you if you are the bottom man. It is dumb. It's certainly very dumb to get tapped by it, but I'll never side with the guy on top for not knowing how to break a buggy choke or not trying to break a buggy choke. You're just going to lay there on top of them in the buggy choke, not being choked but not doing anything. I think you deserve to be stood up or lose the round because that guy is attempting a quote-unquote submission. Then in your co-main event, fresh off signing to fight until she's 60, Holly Holm came back and smashed the number 6 in the world very easily. Not particularly entertainingly, but sat on top of her and elbowed her in the face with the odd ish flurry on the feet. And then she got everyone up in the arms afterwards by coming out against MILF Manor. And if there's a subject that I want to talk about seriously today on the podcast, it's MILF Manor. It's disgusting, these mums sexualizing their children by feeding their abs to work out which one is their son. No, honestly, don't give a shit. Not going to get involved in your culture war bollocks, mate. Did see a couple of very funny takes about Holly Holm being concerned about women being given male hormones, which... honestly, if there's anyone who is clean and just a freak athlete, I could absolutely believe that it's Holly Holm. Because she won 8 boxing world titles without learning to box. She just goes forever. Watch a Holly Holm match and like the walking punches that she does constantly in the boxing ring, not in MMA. And imagine if someone tried that at the decent levels of men's boxing. Like every punch was a shift. But you know what? I hope Holly Holm gets her last title shot. I hope she wins the last title. It'd be a nice end to the Holly Holm story. I just hope that I don't have to watch any more fights with her in. It's always been the case. There is a huge bump, allegedly, for Holly Holm fights. When she appears on fight night cards, they used to put her in the headliner all the time because she was an effective bump of the ratings. I'm just wondering, who are these people who remember the Ronda Rousey fight but haven't seen anything since, or at least haven't remembered any of the fights since? Absolutely baffling. Sorry, she's Yana Santos now. I keep calling her Yana Kunitskaya. But she tried, you always knew this one was going to be a stinker because Yana Kunitskaya's game is getting double underhooks along the fence and kneeing. And Holly Holm's game is ish-ish on the outside, but also leaning on the fence. Big fan of that too. And then Albert Jurayev had a stinker with Chidi Njokwani, as expected. Lucas Alexander versus Steven Peterson was very weird. I was expecting Peterson to be like a last-minute replacement or something, but yeah, he just ran at this dude and didn't seem to know how to deal with any strikes coming back. There was a moment where he cornered him along the fence and tried to herd him into a spinning back fist, and you're like, yeah, nice idea. But he was too far out, and then he ran after him to try and keep him along the fence and just ate a right straight down the pipe and fell over. It was like someone ran into the top half of a stable door as it swung out. But Alexander got the well-earned decision. I mean, Peterson just... I don't understand how he had so many fights and looked so weird in there. And, he went the distance with Julian Erosa in his last one, so he's not bad by any means. Oh, Daniel Pineda versus Tucker Lutz. This was a funny one. White people love being called Tucker Lutz. That's such a great name. Lutz was a huge favourite in this one, but watching it, Pineda worked him out pretty quick. He was landing some lovely... was he the southpaw or was Tucker Lutz the southpaw? But open guard, rear hand uppercuts to the body or head on the inside and then the lead hook over the top. Lovely counter combination. He was landing that lots. Chewing him up with some nice kicks. Got the guillotine in the second round after attacking the guillotine, getting top position of the guillotine, getting the back and then going back to the guillotine. It was pretty cool. It was nice to see Pineda back in action because I watched him against Cub Swanson and he looked like a guy who was really good but far too confident against the old Cub Swanson. Because he did great in round one and then Cub Swanson just knocked him out because Cub Swanson is an old man, but he still hits. And he's still Cub Swanson. He's still better than 90% of fighters at that weight. But Pineda's had a crazy career because he's been around forever. He was losing to like Mike Brown back at UFC 146 in 2012. I believe, does that mean that he's been in the UFC longer than Rani Yahya? But yeah, he's still got a couple of years left in him. 40 fights on the old record. And it's always good to see an upset because Tucker Lutz had only lost once before this. So he was the prohibitive favourite. And that's your lot. An Apex card on the road is how I'd describe it. We did lose Alex Perez versus Manel Cape. That was a really sad one. Alex Perez has been absolutely cursed in recent years. I never thought he was a world beater, but he was a good enough flyweight to get a title shot at Davison Figueiredo. He headlined a pay-per-view, which no one remembers because, when did flyweights headline pay-per-views? And certainly not Alex Perez. And then, he's just been basically out of action since then. I think he had one fight and lost quickly, but he's had something like 7 or 8 cancellations, which is, partly him, partly his opponents. But he's been signed to fight good guys like Matt Schnell, Askar Askarov, Kai Kara France was the most recent one. And it was a Kai Kara France injury that cancelled that fight. But this one, apparently he had a seizure before the fight, which is terrifying. And then Manel Cape was super not classy about it, just reminding you why he's such a dickhead. All the more reason to go back and watch him just get absolutely styled on by Kyoji Horiguchi after being like, I'm the greatest, witness the greatness, walking towards him with his hands out and just getting dropped. Anyway, next weekend, bit of a quiet one. We got Bellator, Golm versus James. Possibly the worst Bellator card ever assembled. They took like 3 weeks off and they came back with a Marcelo Golm main event. But there's always boxing and kickboxing and other stuff to talk about. On the Boycast, I'm going to talk about Rise El Dorado. Really good event. Really fun fighters on it. I might start a video series about just a quick rundown of some of the names in Japanese kickboxing, Jkick. Just as I learn about them, to be honest, just what I take away from watching their style and their fights, and just a quick Filthy Casuals guide, but really brief and with less knowledge about it beforehand. Anyway, I'm going to be back on the Boycast to chat about fun stuff. Send us an email at jagslagpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll answer some of those this week, because God knows there's not a lot going on. If you want to get in on the extra podcasts and articles and things, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jag Slag, repurposing the tough house as MILF Manor. Bless.